Hey, y'all, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is my college football summer school series on Cover 3. I bring on the team experts from the 24/7 sports staff and ask them the questions I care about. No fluff. Which players will be toughest to replace? What position groups are sneakily better or worse than I realize? We get you the scoop on each team in 20 minutes or less. Let's go. Hey, guys, Bud Elliott here. Welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast. This is my summer school series, and if you hear my voice, I'm basically having my flu game 20 years ago, or 19 years ago, I guess. 19, was it? I don't know. I can't do math right now. I'm pretty hard up if I can't do math. I'm usually the math guy on Cover 3. Anyway, today is Iowa, and I can do some math on Iowa and count to the number of points they're supposed to score per game. And to discuss that, we're gonna bring on David Eickholtz of HawkeyeInsider, who's absolutely killing it. Man, I like all on Twitter. We got a bunch of people asking for you. Like, when's the Iowa episode? Is Dave going to come on? And here you are. Welcome.
Hey, man. Yeah, man. It's good to be joining you again. We've certainly had a couple of fun debates here over the last couple of seasons, and I actually think we'll have a manageable offense to talk about, unlike last season. There's a lot of storylines with this team, and I'm really, really excited to dive into it with you.
I'm excited about this, legitimately here. So last year, this was the biggest offensive/defensive split I've ever seen in Bill Connolly's stuff. They were 120th in offense and number 1 in defense. So we can quibble with that. Like, would I really take Iowa's defense over Georgia's? Probably not. But, the numbers are what the numbers are, and that's an enormous split. It has to be, like, not that you root for the team given that you cover them, but it has to be frustrating to just watch them do that same stuff over and over again and squander a defense of that caliber and go 7-5 in the regular season.
Yeah, I think that's true, especially when you look at how the season ended. They could have backdoored their way into that Big Ten title game, but with a Cooper DeJean injury, really, I think hurt them in that Nebraska game. But Trey Palmer and that Trey Palmer offense with Nebraska really made Iowa pay. So I think Iowa's level of frustration, especially given that the offensive coordinator is the son of Kirk Ferentz, I think a lot of people were very pessimistic heading into this offseason. Once Iowa landed Michigan transfer Cade McNamara, I think it really, really started a domino effect for this team. But I'd be lying to you, Bud, if I didn't tell you that the frustrations and the tension is still at an all-time high. I think there's a lot of high expectations with this team. And to go back to your original question, it was horrible to watch that offense time after time. You mentioned how they were 120th in offense, but I don't know if there were 11 offenses worse than what Iowa put on last year. I think the all-time low of that Ohio State game was really bad. And then that Nevada game where they only won 27-0, but there were 3 lightning delays. I think I left the press box at 4:30 in the morning because it was a night game as well. So very, very frustrating. And I think it was even more frustrating just having the fan base sort of reaction, just being a dead horse time and time again about when's this offense going to change, when you really knew there was no immediate way for that offense to change in the middle of the season. So they just kind of had to struggle through it.
So I actually also watched that Nevada game. I was very interested in the outcome of that game. And if you told me that I was only going to score 27, I would not have felt great. But the number was so low to lay, and they obviously shut him out. But I was worried the game wasn't going to go 55 minutes, and they would cancel it, right? And that would be a avoided wager. So my first question for you on this offense, and I am legitimately more excited about this unit this year. I know I had argued with Carl Reed on the 24/7 channel that, like, how much better can they really be if they didn't use the transfer portal to get a new offensive coordinator? But how did they convince these transfers, other than just we have playing time here and no real competition, to come to play for this offense? And how good do you think they can be?
Yeah, I think you summed it up best. I remember a clip shortly after Cade McNamara committed. You said, Cade McNamara, you have to be stupid to go play in an Iowa offense. And Cade McNamara is not stupid. Talking to him throughout the spring, he's an incredibly intelligent kid, very, very energetic, and has a high level of swagger. And I think that's something that Iowa's offense has really missed from a quarterback position over the past few years. And I'll go back to this. Look, Brian Ferentz, I don't think is a good offensive coordinator. I think every other school in the country would have fired Brian. And obviously there's a lot more tension, I think, within the Iowa program, given Kirk Ferentz's longest tenured head coach and him being the father, yada, yada, yada. But Kirk always is willing to change. It just takes a lot longer for him to realize it and to change. And I think that's been an important tool. Iowa has not utilized the NCAA transfer portal, and I think they landed a home run in Cade McNamara. I think they just promised him, hey, we're going to give you the keys to the offense. This is kind of what we're looking at. And I think from Cade's perspective, one, it gives him a chance to potentially face Michigan in the Big Ten title. And I don't think he'll ever admit it, Bud, but you've seen enough of him playing. I think he really, really wants to get back at Michigan, to go from captain, a Big Ten championship winning quarterback. I think he wants to prove it that he wasn't just a game manager for them. He was a very important part of what they did to make that college football playoff run. And then you look at the other transfers Iowa's gotten. Eickholtz, who I think has very, very high upside, especially if he's healthy. From all indications, I've been told he's 100%. Same thing with Caden McNamara. You look at Caleb Brown, the Ohio State wide receiver, who I think would have had rotational play this upcoming season for the Buckeyes had they not had, I think, arguably the most stacked wide receiver talent maybe I've ever seen. I think Alabama could rival it from a few years ago. But then you look at the two new offensive linemen, another wide receiver, and Seth Anderson. Iowa really did an overhaul in the NCAA transfer portal. And I think it was more so the challenge of getting Caden McNamara and saying, hey, Iowa's NIL is a big factor in this. I think Kirk Ferentz's reputation is a big factor. Still playing the Big Ten was a factor. And once Caden McNamara landed Iowa, it was a domino effect to how the rest of, I think, the portal process played out for Iowa.
So Iowa used to have offensive lines that pretty consistently would maul people in the run game. And recently the run game has slipped. And I'm sure part of that is opponents really don't respect the pass game. So they beat you by outnumbering you at the point of attack. But like Iowa's also not having a ton of offensive linemen drafted highly, at least none of the numbers they used to, over like the last two drafts. They only lose Jack Plum off last year's line. So they return basically everybody as long as my depth chart's correct. Are you expecting a big jump from this group?
Yeah, and I think Kirk Ferentz is too. And I think it's a make or break year for George Barnett. And remember, George Barnett's a guy who is very respected in the coaching circle. I think he's done a really nice job of landing high talent, almost blue chip prospects in Iowa's offensive line. But now that it's been the system for a couple of years, it's really, really important for Iowa to get the offensive line going. Now, look, Spencer Petras, Iowa's former quarterback, I don't think he was all of the problem. I think a lot of people threw a lot of criticism toward his way, and some of it rightfully so. But that offensive line did zero favors, and there were zero perimeter threats to really help Petras at least maneuver in the pocket. But now you look at Rusty Feth, the Miami, Ohio transfer. I think he's going to play a big factor. I think getting Dijon Parker, the Saginaw Valley State transfer, who was once committed to Virginia but never officially signed, so Iowa continued to recruit him in that first portal opening. He's likely to start an offensive tackle. And I think Logan Jones, Iowa center, is in for a huge breakout year. He's a guy I'm keeping a close eye on. Talk about unrealistic expectations and big-time shoes to fill. I mean, you takes over for Tyler Linderbaum, who is one of the Big Ten's best centers, I think, at least since the Kirk Ferentz got there. I think he really, really was unbelievably talented. I think he carried that offensive line as much as a one lineman can, especially from a center position. But Logan Jones, incredibly athletic, incredibly strong. His confidence seems to be going at a much higher rate than it was last year. So I think Kirk Ferentz is very optimistic about it. Now, again, it's sort of shut up and prove it, I think, in all aspects of Iowa's offense. But I can undoubtedly tell you by talking to people within the program, this is the first year, at least in the past 2 or 3 years, where Kirk says, all right, we have some depth. We have some talent to work with. Now we have to shut up and make it happen because, Bud, I'm sure we'll touch on this later. This is a make or break year for Iowa football from this standpoint. Divisions are going away. USC, UCLA are joining the Big Ten. USC is really, I think, going to continue to rise. If Iowa's going to win a Big Ten title, at least in the Kirk Ferentz era, it's boom or bust. They have to get it this year. And I think that's also why, Kirk was so aggressive in the NCAA transfer portal.
All right, 2 questions here. Do they have top 70 talent, and can they have a top 70 offense?
Top 70 talent, I say yes.
On offense.
On offense, I think top 70 talent. Will they get there? I don't think so.
Okay.
Because I think, at least on paper, Luke Lachey is a guy we haven't touched on. I think Luke Lachey could be a potential top 2-round pick next year. For as bad as Iowa's offense was last year, Sam Laporta, I think he would have been a little bit more highly touted had he been on a much higher rate offensive team in college football. I think the pros obviously looked past that, considering he went number 34 overall in the NFL draft. But Luke Lachey, son of former Ohio State great Jim Lachey, this is a guy who is going to continue to rise, I think, in the mock draft rankings as well. He had 4 touchdowns last season, 6'6", 250 pounds, very athletic, crisp route runner, and he catches everything. I mean, you look at Caden McNamara and how Iowa really utilizes the tight end position. That's why I look at Eickholtz, I look at Luke Lachey. But it sounds crazy. But if they get the protection up front, I think that those two could have TJ Hawkinson and Noah Fant type numbers for this Iowa offense. I think that they have that kind of upside. Again, assuming Eric All can stay healthy. Cade McNamara is probably Iowa's best consistent passer that they've had at quarterback since maybe Ricky Stanzi, but Ricky Stanzi was also kind of a risk it or biscuit kind of quarterback. I mean, I remember a game where he had 5 interceptions against Indiana in the third quarter and then threw 3 touchdowns in the fourth to lead him to a win. So I think talent-wise, they have a lot of potential. Caleb Johnson at running back could be a breakout player across the country, 5.2 yards per carry last season, 779 yards. This is a guy who I think could have 1,100 yards on the ground, 6'1", 220 pounds, built like a pro prospect already. So talent-wise, yes, but is Brian Ferentz a good enough play caller and offensive coordinator to make all the pieces work? Because I do fully believe that the pieces are there to really it sounds so weird just to argue that they can compete, Bud, but that's kind of where we're at with the Iowa football offense.
Yeah, I mean, if you I don't it's not fair to completely take out the COVID year, but that was not a full season. It was a very awkward season for a lot of teams. Their last 3 full seasons of college football, their best offense is 86th.
Yep.
I mean, that's kind of a squandering defenses ranked 2nd, 6th, and 1st. So obviously a huge question on the mind of anybody trying to handicap the Big Ten West race. But like if they can just go from objectively terrible to just below average or just like kind of bad, but not horrible. I'm not trying to be condescending here, but like realistic goals. Then they should still be pretty darn good on defense. Up front, they get both defensive tackles back, but they lose Wagner and they lose Van Ness. What's the level of concern, if any, for that defensive end spot?
0. I mean, I'll tell you from Jay Neiman, Kelvin Bell, and Kirk Ferentz. Kirk Ferentz says this is probably one of his deepest defensive lines he's had in his tenure. I mean, you're talking about they could rotate 10 or 11 guys. Remember, they lost Lucas Van Ness on the edge, who went 13th overall, the Green Bay Packers. But a guy I will continue to advocate for that did not get any credit last season is Deontay Craig. I mean, he played 130 fewer snaps than Lucas Van Ness, was still 2nd on the team in tackles for loss, had 6.5 sacks. He had 3 tackles for loss in that bowl game win against Kentucky. He is a high-powered, productive machine, explosive first step. Very, very excited to see him sort of break out. They also get Joe Evans back, 6th-year guy on that edge, was a former walk-on linebacker. He has a chance to be top 5 all-time in sacks in Iowa football history with a big year this year. So a lot of space eaters up front. The defensive line, I don't think they're really too worried about. I think Iowa feels very confident in it. The linebacker room will be interesting, but as weird as it sounds, the secondary is where I think there's the most question marks, but a lot of high upside players in that secondary. But as far as defensive tackles and defensive ends, Iowa still feels really, really good about the defense. Phil Parker, Iowa's defensive coordinator, who I will say is probably the most underappreciated and undervalued coordinator in the country. He has said that it's very possible that this defense could be just as good as last year's.
Wow, that would be tremendous, especially since they do lose Jack Campbell, first-round linebacker, one of the best zone droppers that I think you'll ever see at the college level. They also lose Benson. Those guys basically never came off the field, and they both played like 800-something snaps and just stayed healthy and dominated. They go get Nick Jackson from Virginia. I'm curious how he's looked.
So he's going to arrive on campus here in a few weeks.
Okay,
but he's going to be a summer enrollee. But it's impossible to replace Jack Campbell. I think he's arguably Iowa's best linebacker in school history. I think he's at least top 2 or top 3. Josie Jewell's probably in that category as well. Pat Anger was really, really good. Larry Station. But Nick Jackson, I mean, you talk about a guy who did a lot with a little. I think he had 113 tackles in 10 games last season. You throw him in with Iowa's defensive schemes, which is the defensive line, big time space eaters, the linebackers come up, make the play. It won't shock me, Bud, if Nick Jackson has 135 or more tackles this upcoming season. I think it's a perfect fit for what Nick Jackson wanted to look for to get the most out of his potential and what Iowa can offer. So I'm very, very eager to see what he can do. But that linebacker room, it's impossible to replace Jack Campbell. Seth Benson, I think, was very underappreciated because of how good Jack Campbell was. So if Iowa doesn't feel good about their linebackers, you could see them play a little bit more of the 4-2-5 defense this upcoming season as well.
With Riley Moss and Kevon Merriweather gone, you mentioned there's some uncertainty about the secondary. I feel like Phil Parker's secondaries are always just so well coached and disciplined. They don't give up big plays. They tackle well. They They pass off routes in space when they're playing zone, which is pretty frequent. Is there? It's just the unproven nature, or do we not think that they have the dudes?
I think they have the dudes, and I'll put out my hot take of the season right now. I think Cooper DeJean is going to win next year's Jim Thorpe Award.
Ooh,
I think he is just ready to break out. He started last season at cash, but Iowa feels good enough to play him at either safety spot, either corner spot, or that cash spot. Had 5 interceptions last season. Had 3 of them returned for a touchdown. I believe 24/7 Sports ranked him as the number 8 most dynamic player in the list that they released a couple of days ago. But Cooper DeJean, it will not shock me if he just has a breakout season. I think right now Iowa's worried about a couple things. One is going to be the cash position. Sebastian Castro is a 5th-year guy, played really, really well in that bowl game against Kentucky, but they just need to see him continue to have that consistency in that spot. And that third cornerback spot, Iowa lost Terry Roberts to the NCAA transfer portal, who ended up going to Miami. But I believe now he's back in the portal. But Iowa right now is still continuing to look at who's going to step up in that third spot. And Jamari Harris, who had a breakout season in 2021, could step up, missed all of 2022 due to injury. So they need to see if he can continue to be up to speed there. And then you go back in that safety. You mentioned Kayvon Merriweather, who I thought should have been drafted, was I think a second-team All-American, maybe a first-team All-American, but CBS Sports. Xavier Wampa is taking over for him. And Xavier Wampa was I think Iowa's highest-rated defensive back recruit in the internet era. I know at least the most talented player that Phil Parker's ever had to work with. Had a pick 6 in that bowl game win against Kentucky. That was his first career start, but 5-star guy, 6'2", 220 pounds, incredibly athletic, great vision, was an early enrollee. All the tools are there, Bud, but can he maximize that and continue to work toward his potential? Because Kayvon Merriweather may have been limited in a couple of areas, but there was one thing he was always, and that's consistent. He never gave up a big play this past season at Iowa. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Xavier Wampa, knowing him and talking to him and covering his recruitment since high school. He's going to welcome that while shutting out the outside noise. But again, there's going to be a lot of pressure on this Iowa defense if they want to get back to the Big Ten title.
No doubt about it. David, where would you say is the largest drop-off on this team from starters to backups? Like, where do they have, other than quarterback, because pretty much everybody's going to say that, like, where do they have to stay healthy because the backups really just can't play?
Wide receiver, without doubt. I mean, you look at the wide receiver room for Iowa, I think there's a couple of proven guys. Nico Reganey, who's back for his 6th year. He's a very consistent slot guy for Iowa. Caleb Brown, and it's so wild, Bud, that, people are talking about Caleb Brown breaking out for Iowa. Iowa fans are over the moon about it. But we're talking about a guy that's played 27 college football snaps and has 1 catch for, I think, 5 yards, which ironically came against Iowa during Ohio State's blowout win. But Iowa has just not had a wide receiver of his upside. I mean, from explosiveness to route running and versatility. Played a lot of running back in high school. So you have a couple of good guys up front. I think Deontay Vines could be in for a big season as well. But then you have that drop-off. Seth Anderson has not played at the Power 5 level yet. Was a very, very good wide receiver for Charleston Southern before transferring to Iowa. Son of former NFL wide receiver Flip Anderson, who has the most receiving yards in a single game in NFL history. So it will be interesting there. But behind that, Bud, there's just a lot of walk-ons. And Iowa has to stay healthy at that wide receiver spot. And Iowa fans have been advocating for this to happen. It's never going to happen in a billion years. But they want Cooper DeJean to play some wide receiver just because he's so versatile and he's so explosive. But I think he's far too valuable in that defensive back room and as a punt returner to be able to do that. But the largest drop-off, without a doubt, it's got to be wide receiver.
I mean, look, Travis Hunter's doing it at Colorado. So
yeah,
who knows? I look at this schedule and I see a lot of opportunity for this defense to just really eat, right? I mean, Utah State, Iowa State, Western Michigan. I think Penn State will be good on offense, and that's the whiteout game. That's difficult. Like Michigan State, Purdue, at Wisconsin. Really not sure how well the Dairy Raid will look this year. Minnesota, Northwestern, Rutgers, Illinois, Nebraska. They could go the entire season and play one team that has a top 25 caliber offense. It really could be another situation where this defense just dominates.
Yeah, and that whiteout game, I think, is going to change the trajectory of where Iowa's potential is this season. Last time Iowa played in that whiteout game was when Adrian Claiborne blocked the punt or turned it for a touchdown on national TV before Ricky Stanzi got hurt in that game against Northwestern, which arguably cost Iowa a Big Ten title that year. So painful memory for Hawkeye fans there. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think this defense statistically can stack up. Now it's for a variety of reasons. I think there's a lot of talent there. I think the schedule is, I don't want to say a cakewalk, Bud, but they don't play Ohio State. They don't play Michigan. If they get to the Big Ten
it's not a top half
title,
schedule in the country.
No,
by
not
my
even close.
Numbers. I mean,
no,
I have in like the 70s.
Yeah, and I think the thing is too, which is where I catch a lot of heat for, because I've continually said since the season ended, Iowa should be expected to win the Big Ten West. I think it's a failure of a season if they don't. I'm not going to go Giannis Antetokounmpo and sit here and say it's a process. No, it's a failure if Iowa doesn't win the Big Ten West. And I think Wisconsin under Luke Fickell has such high upside. I think he's going to turn that into a perennial Big Ten contender year in, year out. But with all of the first-year head coaches in the Big Ten West, with Iowa's experience returning, with Kirk Ferentz still being there, like Iowa fans should expect double-digit wins. They should expect to go to the Big Ten title game. And I think Kirk knows that this is his last real opportunity to win a Big Ten title. So it's going to be very, very interesting to watch. That defense will be a lot of fun. The special teams, I don't think will have to carry as much as it has in years past. But I also think the special teams units feel incredibly good about where they're at right now, too.
All right. Do they get the 25 points a game?
I'm surprised, but I thought you were going to ring this one on a little bit earlier. Now, here's what I will say about that. I think they will. But you mentioned how Iowa's highest rate offense was, 86th? I think.
Well, last full season, because in the COVID year, they got all the way up to like 57th, which is, I mean, that's.
Now it's kind of funny that you're measuring points versus yards, right? But if Iowa would have 25 points a game this past season, that would have been good for 85th in the country, because there were 85 teams that hit that mark. So Iowa's expectations right now are be below average. But another aspect of this, Bud, I think there's more pressure on Iowa to do even better than that, because think about this. Gary Barta's done August 1st.
Yeah.
Iowa's looking at a new athletic director. I don't think the athletic director, the new one, is going to bend the knee as much as Gary Barta did. So it's going to be interesting.
Is Kirk Ferentz really not going to pick the new AD? Like I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to be tapped into Iowa's power structure. But at some schools, like Bama's not hiring an AD that Nick Saban doesn't want, right? Like, we know who's going to call the shots at certain schools. It seems to me like Ferentz has to be one of the longest tenures, or maybe the longest tenured head coach in Power 5. So is he really not the guy that's going to pick this AD?
I think he'll have a say. I don't think it's going to be the number one overriding factor. But with that being said, Bud, Gary Barta was the face of Iowa athletics, but Kirk was the one running it behind the scenes. We all know that. But again, I think you also look at this is the upcoming athletic director is going to be the most important hire in Iowa athletics history, because they're going to be hiring Kirk Ferentz's potential replacement. They're going to be hiring Fran McCaffrey's replacement for basketball, Lisa Bluter for women's basketball. And Iowa's had 5 athletic directors in the last 100 years. They've had 4 sports information directors. For a fan base that's so used to consistency, Bud, they're about to get very, very uncomfortable with what's kind of ahead, especially with NIL and the transfer portal and all the changing of the coaches. So if I'm on the Board of Regents, if I'm new Iowa President Barbara Wilson, I run it by Kirk Ferentz. I don't give him the final say. I think it's too important of a hire just from an athletic standpoint to really give him anything more than just, hey, yeah, I approve, or no, I disapprove. Well, either way, we're still going to make the decision what's best for Iowa. But to get back to your other point, Bud, yeah, they'll hit 25 points a game. I do think that was a mistake not making it offensive points, just because of how many points the defense and special team scores.
That's a great point. David Eickholtz, Hawkeye Insider. You guys know he brings the best Iowa information out there. Really appreciate you joining us.
Hey, thanks, Bud. Always good talking to you.